Questions? Questions orales. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Monsieur le Président, le Premier ministre.
Mr. Speaker, can the Prime Minister tell this House and all Canadians that he and his government are doing everything in their power and using all of the tools at their disposal to ensure that the Trans Mountain Pipeline will be built? Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, from the very start, we've shown that we understand that protecting the environment and growing the economy go hand in hand. Under 10 years of Stephen Harper, the Conservatives weren't able to build even 1 kilometre of pipeline to new markets. On this side of the House, we are working to ensure that this pipeline gets built. But that is part of putting a price on carbon and protecting our oceans at the same time. All of that goes together because Canadians know that the environment and the economy go together. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Can the Prime Minister assure this House and all Canadians that he is using every tool at his disposal to ensure that the public support the Trans Mountain Pipeline project?
Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I find it wonderful that a member of the opposition is asking this question because, indeed, we recognize that part of the tools to get this pipeline built is a price on carbon pollution right across the country. Canadians know that protecting the environment and growing the economy must go together. For 10 years, Stephen Harper and his Conservative Party were unable to protect the environment and therefore unable to grow the economy the way they should have.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Well, Mr. Speaker, if the Prime Minister claims to be trying to build public support for this pipeline, perhaps he can explain to the House why his government gave a grant to an environmental lobby group that specifically used those funds to hire an activist to protest against the Trans Mountain project. Does the Prime Minister not realize that paying groups to protest against these projects is exactly part of the problem?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, unlike apparently the member of the Leader of the Official Opposition, we believe in free speech and we believe in advocacy on this side of the House. But, Mr. Speaker, on the specific...
Order. 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 I know that all honourable members believe in free speech. It doesn't mean we can all freely speak at the same time. Order. We need to hear the questions and the answers, whether we like them or not. The Right Honourable Prime Minister has the floor. We'll have some order.
Mr. Speaker, on the issue of this particular advocacy group, it's important to highlight that they were also funded under the Harper government.
Honourable Leader of the Opposition, order.
To protest a pipeline.
Mr. Speaker, this Prime Minister has signed off on a grant that will go specifically to hire an assistant who will, quote, work directly with the provincial organizer and the field organizing team to help our network stop the Kinder Morgan pipeline. Does he not realize that he is funding the very groups who are protesting against the project that is in the national interest?
Right Honourable Prime Minister.
As I said, Mr. Speaker, the previous Harper government also funded this organization, and on this side of the House, Mr. Speaker, we will not brand Canadians as eco-terrorists. We will not remove funding from advocacy organizations because we as a government happen to disagree with them. We remember what that previous government did, and Mr. Speaker, Canadians do not want to go back to those terrible years.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Speaker, what the Prime Minister just said will come as a great surprise to the member for Bonavista, Gander, Grand Falls, Windsor.
That's right.
There is nobody that believes that this Prime Minister is committed to free speech when he punishes all those in this country that don't agree with his personal point of view. But what we're talking about here, Mr. Speaker, is not the principle of free speech. Yes, we all agree in that. What we're talking about is taking tax dollars from people who are out of work in the energy sector and giving it to people who are trying to block a project in the national interest. That's shameful, and Conservatives will stop that practice.
The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Order.
Mr. Speaker, once again, we see Harper's Cup.
Order. Debate. It's not a cacophony. Order. The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Once again, Mr. Speaker, we see the true colours of these Harper Conservatives shining through. The commitment that this government has made to stand up and defend reproductive rights and the rights of women at every single opportunity is one that sticks in their craw, Mr. Speaker. We will not apologize for ensuring that women's rights are protected across this country.
L'honorable député.
The honourable member for Rimouski-Nejet-Témiscouata, des Basques.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I feel awful because I can see the Prime Minister is not reading out of a sheet of paper on this issue now. And I'd like to address him on a very serious concern. And this serious concern is that the government's review of the Kinder Morgan pipeline project was rigged from the get-go. We are worried because we know that Kinder Morgan lobbied this government more than 36 times in 2016 to try to get the green light on this project. Our leader, Jagmeet Singh, and I have asked the Prime Minister for full disclosure of all the documents related to the approval. Will he agree to be fully transparent and release those documents?
Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we recognize that under the previous government, the approach of not understanding how important it is to properly consult and engage in acquiring social license needed to be fixed. That's why we actually added additional steps to make the process more rigorous. In fact, we extended the consultation process to ensure we were meeting and exceeding our responsibility to engage with and consult Indigenous peoples. This is something Conservatives always failed to do.
Honourable member for Rimouski-Nejet-Témiscouata, des Basques. Mr. Speaker, I think the Prime Minister doesn't realize how serious the situation is. So I'll say again, while his government was supposedly consulting First Nations on the Kinder Morgan project, his senior officials were talking to try to get a green light and to expedite the approval process of the project. These directives were deemed troubling by Indigenous legal experts. Will the Prime Minister commit to revealing all documents relevant to the Kinder Morgan approval and assessment process? Yes or no? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, in this House, we all know that the process that Stephen Harper set up didn't work. That's why we added steps to the process to ensure that consultations with First Nations and the rigorous study of this project would be done. We know that the only way to build a consensus across the country, well, not a total consensus, but at least support, is to listen to Canadians from all backgrounds. And that is exactly what we did. And that is why we were able to approve that pipeline. The Honourable Member for Rosemont-Petite-Patrie. Well, here's some news. The Liberal Party of Canada has become the Oil Company Party of Canada. While the Liberals were pretending to consult with people, the CEO of Kinder Morgan was never concerned. Because he knew very well that the decision had already been made in advance and that the consultations were just a smokescreen. The Liberals have made a mockery of Indigenous peoples, scientists, and citizens. Will the Prime Minister be transparent? Will he promise to tabling all documentation relevant to the Kinder Morgan approval process? Yes or no? Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, it's clear that the member for Rosemont-Petite-Patrie could never accept this pipeline. He said so very clearly. He said that regardless of the conditions, he would never approve it. But we talked to Canadians to ensure that we had consulted people widely, that we had a rigorous process in place, and even his leaders said that he would be open to the idea of approving that pipeline. So these are the type of people that we are bringing together, not those who still believe that there is a stark choice between the economy and the environment.
In a Bulkley Valley.
There's no way he even believes that anymore. Look, this whole fiasco of an approval process is looking more rigged than a Russian election. The PM promised the people of Alberta a credible process. He broke that promise. He promised the people of British Columbia meaningful consultation with First Nations. He broke that promise too. You know, many people suspected that the fix was in from the beginning, that the decision had already been made, and now we have the proof from leaked papers from his own administration. So if the Prime Minister wants to regain a scintilla of trust that he once commanded in this country, will he reveal all the Kinder Morgan papers once and for all?
Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, what we actually did in this process was add additional steps and more rigorous process to a process that we all recognize was terribly flawed under the previous Conservative government. We extended the consultation with Indigenous peoples, and I'd ask the member opposite outside of this House to explain why he is ignoring the many Indigenous communities that are in support of this pipeline, that are asking for these pipelines to be built to ensure their future and their kids' future. There are many Indigenous Canadians who feel this is a good path forward. Why are they ignoring them?
The Honourable Member for Richmond North Athabasca. Mr. Speaker, a group working against the natural resources industry is currently seeking an employee to fight the Kinder Morgan project. So this raises the question, why is this organization being funded by a federal grant? Mr. Speaker, can the Prime Minister stop playing with taxpayer money and subsidizing projects that want to hurt our economy and hurt honest energy workers? Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, as I've said, this organization received funding under the Harper government. And on this side of the House, we will not criticize or attack organizations that don't have the same values as us. We will ensure that when it comes to rights and respect for the law, that everything is in order. But we know that Canadians have a wide range of opinions and approaches, and it's important to listen to them. It's important to work with everyone to ensure that there's no increased polarization as the opposition is trying to create. The Honourable Member. Mr. Speaker, this is just nonsense. The Prime Minister needs to stop sending contradictory signals to the energy sector, which employs hard-working Canadians all across the country. This jeopardizes well-paying jobs and scares off investors. It's time that the Prime Minister finally show a little bit of leadership. How can he be for the energy sector and be against it, using taxpayer money to fund initiatives that aim to destroy Kinder Morgan? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, I've been saying since the election campaign that Canadians know that we need to both protect the environment and build a strong economy. Today, we can see that there are people who don't believe in this. The Conservatives are attacking us because we aren't doing as much as they want to move forward with Kinder Morgan. And the NDP is completely against this project. So, as usual, the Liberal Party is focused on the concerns of Canadians, and we will deliver for Canadians.
Mr. Speaker, look, this is about trust. The Prime Minister claims he supports the Trans Mountain expansion and the thousands of jobs it will create, but he's funding anti-energy political activists who are being hired explicitly to stop the pipeline. The PM has already driven out over $80 billion of energy investment, and now he's using taxpayer dollars to block the Trans Mountain expansion. No wonder no one believes a word he says. Why is this Prime Minister using Canadian tax dollars to block Canadian pipelines and kill Canadian jobs?
Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, once again, Canadians know that protecting the environment and growing the economy must go together. The members opposite simply do not understand that. On one side of the House, they're thinking about the economy but not the environment, and that did nothing for the economy under Stephen Harper. On the other side, the NDP is still wrapped up in forgetting about the economy and doing everything they can to try and protect the environment, which isn't working. Canadians know we have to move forward in a thoughtful way that brings people together instead of demonizing them.
The honourable member for Lakeland.
Canada has always produced the most responsible oil in the world, and the Liberals' ongoing attacks is what is collapsing confidence in Canadian energy investment and in our country's reputation.
Right.
The bottom line is this: the Liberals are paying people to, quote, stop the Kinder Morgan pipeline. Chief Ernie Cray of the Sheehan First Nation says, quote, our young people every day come to me and say, I want to get trained. I want a job from the Trans Mountain Pipeline. Why is the Prime Minister undermining Canada's national interest and funding anti-energy activists to kill Indigenous aspirations, thousands of jobs, and the Trans Mountain expansion?
Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, it's actually, it's quite something to watch these guys.
All right, our members don't seem to understand. One side gets to ask the question, the other side gets to have its say as well. Each side gets to have their say. And it's a democracy, and we have to listen in spite of not liking what we hear sometimes. So let's show a little respect for this institution, please. Including the honourable leader, House Leader of the Opposition. The Right Honourable Prime Minister has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's just that once again we see the Conservatives learned nothing in the last election campaign. They continue to try and invent things and torque things and attack their opponents and demonize everyone as they trying to make things happen. It didn't work. It failed miserably. You underestimated Canadians' intelligence when you treat them like children and try and scare them into supporting you. Sorry, Mr. Speaker, not you, but them. Mr. Speaker, we are going to take Canadians seriously.
We're all adults here. Let's act like adults. The honourable member for Carleton.
The Wapoos Farm provides, it's a charity in my riding that provides free vacations to poor families who would not otherwise afford one. But the Prime Minister cut their summer jobs this year because they refused to attest to supporting his ideology. Yet today he claims that an organization which seeks a summer student for the express purpose, and I quote, to stop the Kinder Morgan pipeline gets the money under the Prime Minister's defense of free speech. Why does free speech only apply to those trying to kill Canadian jobs and not those trying to help the less fortunate?
I remind all of our members, and I remind the Prime Minister to address the comments to the Chair. The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the Liberal Party of Canada is the party of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, and we will always stand up to defend Canadians' charter rights. And organizations that cannot ensure that they will abide by the principles in the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, and indeed will work to take away charter rights of Canadians, will not get funding from this government. I know the members opposite don't like that because it means standing up for women's rights and reproductive rights, but it also means we will be unequivocal in always standing up to defend the charter rights of all Canadians.
The honourable member for Carleton.
Mr. Speaker, we just witnessed a Prime Minister accuse the Wapoos Farm of attacking the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. This is an organization that provides low-income families with a rare recreational opportunity, the chance to have a vacation that they would not otherwise afford. They do not impose any values of any kind on those families. They invite them and they give them an opportunity to recreate together and grow. Why is it the Prime Minister is prepared to support funding for jobs for organizations taking away opportunities from Canadians, but not those trying to help the less fortunate.
Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, no matter how the members opposite try to spin it, the Liberal Party and this government will always stand up for charter rights. That is something that is ingrained in what we feel a government's responsibility is. Now, under the Harper Conservatives, we saw regularly them defunding the Court Challenges program, putting forward pieces of legislation that they knew were non-charter compliant. We are simply saying, if you want to move forward and get funding from the government, you need to demonstrate that you're supporting the Charter. I think that's a minimal thing that we can expect of any organization we fund.
The Honourable Member for Salaberry-sur-Roi. Mr. Speaker, not only did this government provide insufficient funding for the fight against sexual assault on university campuses, but now the UN is calling out the government's inaction on violence against women. According to a UN report, there's a flagrant lack of resources and centres to help victims. This is a systemic problem, and the Liberals' piecemeal approach won't solve anything. Will the government stop claiming to be feminist and start taking action to protect women who are victims of violence? Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, we understand how important it is to fight against gender-based violence. That's why in Budget 2018, we announced $5.5 million to improve access to sexual assault prevention centres on campuses and to develop a broader strategy to prevent and fight gender-based violence with an investment of $86 million. We understand that there is much more to be done, but we are there to fight for gender equality and to defend everyone against violence.
The member for Nanaimo, Ladysmith.
That spending's years away. We hear a lot of talk from this Prime Minister, but there's still so much to do on gender equality. This week, the UN Special Rapporteur to End Violence Against Women called out this government for its lack of action to end violence against women. And today, women from 20 countries called on G7 leaders to drop the feminist platitudes and take real action that will change the lives of women now. Now, the feminists I know get stuff done. So when will this Prime Minister drop the fake feminism and take real action for women today in Canada?
Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I very much understand where the member opposite is coming from, but I would exhort her to remember that everyone can be allies as we move forward in the fight for more gender equality, and that level of judgment is not something that is serving Canadians or the world. I was proud to be able to sit down with leaders in the W7 just at lunch today to talk about how we can do more and we must do more on gender-based violence, on promoting true equality and equity around the world. There's much to do, and we are proud that we are having this conversation and leading in this conversation.
Honourable Member for Haliburton, Kawartha Lakes, Brock.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister has, in his own words, told Canadians he plans to phase out the energy sector, having already driven out $87 billion in investments, destroying investor confidence in Canada and putting jobs and communities at risk. But that wasn't enough. Can the Prime Minister explain to Canadians why he's using taxpayer money to fund professional protesters whose job description it is to kill the Kinder Morgan pipeline?
Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we all remember from the years of Harper government the organizations that were defunded because the government disagreed with them, whether it's Kairos, whether it's a range of court challenge programs, whether it's other organizations that were labeled as eco-terrorists. That Conservative Party, Mr. Speaker, is consistent in trying to shut down anyone who dares disagree with them. Well, you know what? Canadians shut them down by excluding them from government. We, Mr. Speaker, respect the rights of Canadians to hold a diversity of opinions. We'll defend the Charter.
Honourable Member for Battle River, Crowfoot.
Mr. Speaker, no one believes that this Prime Minister is supportive of Canada's energy industry. Last week when he was in France, he mourned the fact that he couldn't phase it out fast enough. And now we have documents that prove that the Prime Minister is using taxpayers' dollars to fund professional protesters against the Kinder Morgan pipeline. When will the Prime Minister just admit that he is using taxpayer money to fund the protesters and to fund his plan to shut down the Alberta energy sector?
Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, part of the reason why the Conservatives under Stephen Harper, and they continue with the same approach, weren't able to get a single kilometre of pipeline towards new markets built was because they didn't understand that respecting a broad range of voices in this country, encouraging people to express their views and working with them instead of shutting them down is the way to ensure that we can move forward as a united country that both gets that growing the economy and protecting the environment must go together in the 21st century.
The Honourable Member for Louis Saint Laurent. Mr. Speaker, the true nature of the Prime Minister is to hold Canadian oil in contempt. He already said that he wanted to phase it out, but apparently it's not going fast enough for him. And the economy is suffering from his attitude. $84 million less in investments, many jobs lost, two pipelines that didn't go ahead and one that may not go ahead after all. And what is he doing now? Giving grants to companies that want to hire someone to organize a network to stop the Kinder Morgan project. Why is the Prime Minister helping those who want to destroy the Canadian economy? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, for the last nearly 2.5 years since we've been in power, we've seen the economy grow. We've seen the best year of economic growth last year in the G7. We've seen the unemployment level at historically low levels. We've seen the creation of 600,000 new jobs. And we know that we are creating an economy that is growing, but that still respects and protects the environment. That's what Canadians want. And that's particularly what they want after 10 years of paltry economic performance under the Conservatives.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister has already killed $87 billion of investment in our energy sector. Now we finally have confirmation that he is actively funding the protests against Kinder Morgan. Here's the posting for the job that he is funding, and I quote, "Help our organizing network stop the Kinder Morgan pipeline and tanker project." Why is the Prime Minister funding these campaigns against our energy industry?
Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Again, Mr. Speaker, we remember the Stephen Harper years that so many of the members opposite were part of, where anyone who dared disagree with official government position got persecuted, marginalized, yanked their funding, shut down. That was the approach that Canadians suffered under for 10 years. And I can understand their outrage that perhaps we encourage advocacy on a broad range of issues. But Canada is a country strong, not in spite of its differences, but because of our differences. And we will always support the rights of Canadians to express themselves.
And order. Order.
The Honourable Member for Jonquière. Mr. Speaker, the government's lack of clarity around NAFTA talks is worrying farmers in Saguenay-Lac-Saint-Jean and Quebec. We know we can't trust the Liberals not to